ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين وصلى الله على آله الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
فيشوف عباد الله ونفسي بتقوى الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
आज गुफ्तगू इंग्लिश उर्दू में होगी.
इंग्लिश उर्दू जैसे आप इंग्लिश
हाँ
इंग्लिश इंग्लिश
सलावत
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
We are getting close to the day of Ashura. The Shia world is commemorating the tragedy of Karbala. And it's actually a reminder of the reality that we see in history, that whenever conflicts come up, the very first victim of the conflict is Haqq and the truth. Because once the events take place, the aggressor party, the unjust party will always try to blame the victim. This is a very old game which has been going on. And we see, that's why those of you who were here on the last Friday, when I talked about the wasiyat of Imam alayhi salatu wasalam before he left Medina, the reason initially he, explained that, these are not the motivations that I have. And the purpose was that he knew that the enemies, the Yazidi forces, the Umayyad, propaganda ministry will basically try everything in order to portray that Hussein ibn Ali was the aggressor, he was the one, he initiated all this. And Imam made it very clear that I have not risen, for seeking adventure or out of arrogance or create chaos in the society. I am doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar. And the whole purpose was basically Talabul Islah fi Ummati Jaddi, in order to reform the community of my father. And when we, look at this issue, we come to realize that this is not only, related to those days. Even now, if you look at the major conflict which is going on in the Middle East, there the whole issue is that, and I will be kind of very diplomatic in what I'm saying, don't worry about it, but within the bounds of law, that when it comes to the state of Israel, they always say we are defending. The mantra is that, we are just responding to aggression. Whereas, it depends. Where do you go back in history and say, okay, this is the point of beginning? Because if you look at it back, this all started after the First War. And according to one of the Canadian non-Muslim scholars, was head of the Department of History, he has a book which he wrote for the undergrad students about the modern Middle East. And he summarizes the conflict of Palestine in a very beautiful way. He says this is the story of the land that belonged to one nation, which was taken over by the second nation and handed over to the third nation. So if you really want to go and pinpoint what is the point of beginning, that was the point of beginning. Because Islam, out of the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it is the only religion which actually gives a recognition to the other two faiths. Yahud don't recognize Isa ibn Maryam as a prophet. They say he was an impostor. Christians and Jews together don't recognize Rasulullah as a Rasul. They say he was just making up things on his own. It is only Islam from day one. Nothing to do with this international, interfaith dialogue which is common now. This has been there in our faith and aqidah from day one, that we recognize the origin of Judaism and Christianity as revealed religions. Changes came, corruption came, that's another issue. But that's why we give them a special name, we call them Ahlul Kitab. We differentiate between the kuffar and the we say there is Ahlul Kitab and then there are other non-Muslims. And that's where we see that, this whole phenomenon of, Muslims and Arabs hating Jews, this is not really a reality at all. The whole idea of anti-Semitism is a European notion. It started here, not in the Middle East, not among the Muslims. Historically, the Muslims were, relatively speaking, benevolent and, accommodative towards the minorities, even when it comes to the Jewish communities. Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
So when we hear all these issues, it reminds me of a phenomenon which is really one of the said, signs of the modern civilization. When it comes to science and technology, we have reached to the highest level. The men can now even fly and go to moon. Step on the moon and come back. But when it comes to understanding dialogue with one another, we really are still down. To the extent that I may use this term, that one of the hallmarks of the modern society is hypocrisy. They would say one thing but do something else. And look at the entire, structures that we have on a global level, United Nations, Security Council. Things are discussed there, but never really implemented as far as, justice and fairness is concerned. It is still the people who are in power have their own say. And this is where we come to realize that, they can talk about human rights, they can talk about democracy and all these issues, but it seems this is only for them and not for the rest of the world. And this is where it brings me back to this ayat of Quran right in the beginning in Surah Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually talks about three groups, starting with mu'mineen, and then he talks about kuffar, and then he talks about munafiqeen, the hypocrites. When he talks about the hypocrites, he uses a term, he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. When it is said to them, do not do fasad, do not create problems and, mischief on the earth, they say, they respond according to the words of the Quran, they say, we are the muslihun, we are the peacemakers. And Allah responds to that by saying, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. No, they are the actual mufsid and troublemakers, وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. But they are so much into arrogance and denial that they do not want even to recognize that they are actually the mufsid and not muslih. They are not the peacemakers. And this is the reality that we see. But at the end of the discussion, we always have to keep in mind that the end, inshallah, is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We always wait for the Imam who will come and bring global peace to the world. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of Surah Shu'ara, سَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. A day will come when the zalimeen and the oppressors will come to realize, things would change, and that would be, inshallah, the time of a true and durable peace in the world. In
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
إن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله العزيز. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحليم الكريم غافر الذنب وقابل التوب وهو الغفور الرحيم. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا هو العطوف للعباد بجوده والعواد على المذنبين بحلمه. ونشهد أن محمدا نبيه وحبيبه.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين ورحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وآله الداعين إلى سبيل الله بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وعدة الأمم وأولياء النعم ومعدن الرحمة. أوصيكم قال الله بتوبة ما سلف من ذنوبكم. Going back to the theme of Karbala, this whole issue of blaming the victim. Imam Salih al-Islam, as I said, he made sure that people would not ascribe any wrong motives to him. But we see that continuing later on, especially among those who are inclined towards the Wahhabi ideology. The founder of this thought of Wahhabism, you see, Wahhabism is the name which comes from Sheikh Abdul Wahhab, who was the Sheikh during the time when Al Saud came to power. Before even they took Makkah and Medina, in the Najd area. And Sheikh Abdul Wahhab is the one who promoted these ideas of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah lives in the 7th century of the Hijrah. And so when we call Wahhabism, the present outfit is basically known as Wahhabi, but they actually base their ideas on Ibn Taymiyyah. And look at the example of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah actually is in total denial when it comes to Karbala. I'll give you his words. He actually has a booklet, and the title is Su'al fi Yazid bin Muawiyah. Question about Yazid bin Muawiyah that they asked him. He says, فَيَزِيد لَمْ يَعْمُرْ بِقَتْلِ الْحُسَيْنِ. The first statement, he says that Yazid did not order the killing of Hussein. وَلَا حُمِلَ رَأْسُهُ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ, and his head was not taken to him. وَلَا نَكَتَ بِالْقَضِيِّ عَلَى ثَنَايَاهُ, and he did not use his stick to hit the blessed teeth of Abu Abdullah Hussein. بل الذي جر هذا منه هو عبيد الله بن زياد. Now he's putting the blame not on Yazid. He said everything this was done by Ibn Ziyad. كما ثبت ذلك في صحيح البخاري. He says he's relying on Sahih Bukhari. And then he says ولا طيف برأسه في الدنيا. Hussein's head was not taken and paraded around the cities in the Muslim world. ولا سبي أحد من أهل الحسين, and no one from the family of Hussein was made a prisoner. So this is total denial of the tragedy of Karbala. Killing, yes, but that also he deflects it from Yazid to Ibn Ziyad. And this is the mentality which continued even before him actually. There was a scholar by the name of Ibn al-Arabi. I'll just make sure people don't get confused. There is Ibn Arabi and Ibn al-Arabi with Alif Lam. Ibn Arabi is the mystic Sufi master in Andalusia. And Ibn al-Arabi is a Sunni faqih in Egypt. So they're two different people. Before Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Arabi in Egypt, who was a faqih and a mujtahid in among Sunnis, he actually in his book Al-Awasim, he says, ما قتل الحسين إلا بسيف جده. Hussein was not killed but by the sword of his grandfather. He's trying to justify the qatl of Hussein. You know, why he says, لأن بيعة يزيد قد سبقت. Because Yazid's bay'at came first, والحسين باغ عليه. And Hussein alayhi salam rebelled against him. You know, so now they are even using Rasulullah and saying, you know, according to the Sharia of Rasulullah, Hussein has been killed. And this is where you see that even before him, a very famous, you know, Sufi master whose books are very popular even these days, translated in different languages, Imam Ghazali, who came even before Ibn al-Arabi, before Ibn Taymiyyah. Imam Ghazali, and this is the irony of the Muslim world when it comes to blaming the victim. You know, Imam Ghazali has a book called Ihya al-Ulum, you know, reviving the Islamic studies. And it's not a bad book as far as the theme is concerned. Of course, we are concerned with the content and his outlook about it. There was another alim later on came by the name of Faiz al-Kashani, who actually used the Urdu term, उन्होंने ग़ज़ाली की किताब की तत्हीर की. He took his themes, his discussions, everything the way he has discussed, but then he replaced all the ahadith from Sunni sources to whatever could be found in the Shia source relevant to those themes of akhlaq and everything. And wherever the views are different from Shia and Sunni, he would replace that with the Shia views. But anyway, going back to Imam Ghazali, who is known as a very, you know, senior spiritual master, he actually talks about, in the section on akhlaq, he talks about su'e zan or husn zan, you know, which means a Muslim should have good opinion about other Muslims and not have negative thoughts. So if you see somebody doing something, and if there is a way of justifying and explaining it, you should take the positive side. Husn zan we also use in Urdu. And he then, as an example, this is the irony, you know, if you're not in the path of Ahlul Bayt, you can be a greatest of the scholar, but you will fall down. As an example of husn zan and su'e zan, he says, let us look at the example of Yazid. Was he really responsible for killing Hussein? No. He says we shouldn't have this, you know, husn zan about him. We don't know. We are not sure about it. We should have positive thought about him, that he was not responsible. And then he extends, he gives the fatwa, يحرم على الواحد ذكر الحسين وأصحابه. Not only that you shouldn't have any wrong thoughts about Yazid, but it is haram for the orators and the wise and the speakers to talk about Hussein and Ashab Hussein. Why? And this is where you come to the root. لأنه يحيج على بغض الصحابة. Because when you talk about Imam Hussein alayhi salam and what happened to his companions in Karbala, he says this, you know, it increases this hatred towards the Sahaba. Because eventually, you know, if you look at Karbala, Karbala is not an isolated event, just happened in the year 61 of the Hijrah. You know, you have to see what happened before it. And when you trace the line back, it goes to the, you know, to the Sahaba. In order to protect the Sahaba, he's saying it's haram for the wise to talk about Hussein and Ashab of Hussein. And so we need to realize that it's not only these, some of these named mullahs or illiterate mullahs in Peshawar and here and there who don't know anything, talking about, Imam Hussain alayhi salam in a negative way. You have these people who are ulama of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, but they also have this negative view, always going back to this issue of trying to, blame the victim for what happened in Karbala. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Just a few years ago here in Saudi Arabia, there is a TV program where they bring this mufti of the Saudis. It's known as Ma'a Samahat al-Sheikh, audience with the respected Sheikh. And this mufti was actually Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh. And he was asked this question just a few years ago about Imam Hussain alayhi salam and Yazid. Look at the response. I'm leaving the Arabic on the side, and I'll give you the translation. He says, allegiance of Yazid bin Muawiyah was shari'i. It was legitimate. According to the Sharia which was taken at the time of his father Muawiyah. The bay'at was done during the days of Muawiyah, and people had accepted. But after Muawiyah died, Hussain bin Ali and Ibn Zubayr withheld their allegiances. And so now he's saying Hussain and Ibn Zubayr, in their decision not to give allegiance, were wrong. Because the allegiance to Yazid was legitimate and was taken during his father's life, Muawiyah, and was witnessed by the people. By whatever Allah makes destiny, whatever Allah makes your destiny since He is but Allah is the one who makes the destiny, He is the wise and all-knowing. And then look at the way He ends. It says, but after all this, we ask Allah to be happy with Hussein and request Allah for His forgiveness for Hussein. Why do we have to mention him? Whatever mistake he made, he is responsible for it. This is our own time now. And so, this whole issue of, blaming the victim is part of this, game of those who are definitely on the path of batil. And this is where we see, the words of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. When he talks about in the Ziyarat Waris, there is a point where he asks us to say, فَلَعْنُ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً قَتَلَتْكَ, that may the la'nat of Allah be on the people who killed you. وَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً ظَلَمَتْكَ, and may the la'nat of Allah be on the people who were unjust to you. They might not be in Karbala, but they were the one who instigated and brought about these events. And then the last statement, this would even apply to the Sunni of Saudi Arabia. وَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً صَمِيَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ, that may the la'nat of Allah be on the people who hear about the events of Karbala and are pleased with what happened. And so that's where we see that this is an ongoing issue. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us always on the path of Ahlul Haqq with Muhammad and Ali Muhammad salawatullahi
Muhammad.
اللهم صل على سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. اللهم صل
على محمد وعلى
إمام المتقين وأمير المؤمنين